right, let's go. How we doing tonight, Citizen Youth? You guys good? I know we've been talking about this a lot, but I just gotta ask you one more time. Who's excited for summer camp tonight? Let's make some noise. All right, I just gotta know, I'm gonna call some of you out. That's fine, just know I love you. So raise your hand if you're planning on going to camp, but you haven't signed up yet. Anybody? I guess nobody's, that's nobody. Okay, cool, then I guess everybody that signed up needs to go, they're signed up and they're good. But I just really want to stop down for a moment and just encourage you guys, man, if you don't go to summer camp, you are going to have the most FOMO in the world. Like, you need to get there. God radically changed my life at a summer camp back in 2016, long time ago. But man, camp is just amazing. And so if you're on the fence about it, maybe you're doubting a little bit. We're going to talk about that tonight, what doubt looks like. But if you're doubting going to camp, man, I would just encourage you, make sure you sign up for summer camp. I believe that God will radically change your life. But again, you guys excited for summer camp? Make some noise. There we go. Well, hey, at this time, if you could actually help me welcome our Citizen Youth Maui family. They're tuning in tonight. Man, we love you guys. Man, it's so awesome having you guys tune in to youth. And hopefully I can make a trip out there soon. I would love to be in Maui. Who would rather be in Maui than Albuquerque? Anybody? Yeah, just be on the beach a little bit. Well, we love it. I wanted to start off tonight by asking you guys a question. How many of you have ever been like extremely nervous for something? If your hand's not raised, you're lying. That's okay. Maybe, you were nervous to play in a big game. Maybe you were nervous to ask that friend out to prom, or not friend, but you're boothing a little bit because you're nervous, right? Like, they're gonna say no. Like, we've all been nervous before. Like, let's be honest. For some of you, they actually did say no, and we'll pray for you later tonight. But all of us in this room tonight, we've all been nervous. We've all been anxious about something. We've all had these moments in life where we feel this like tightness in our chest. Our body gets super tense because we're just anxious about something. But what if I actually told you that being nervous about something and being excited about something weren't opposites, but they were actually the same thing? There's a study done at Harvard that actually backs up this data. This lady by the name of Alison Brooks, she was a professor at Harvard, and she did this extensive research study on how being nervous and being excited for something was actually the same thing, and it used the same part of your brain. She did this research, and she found out that when people told themselves, I'm excited for this and not I'm nervous for this, the results on what they produced were actually a lot greater. And so whether it was, singing karaoke or doing math problems or public speaking, the study showed that reframing anxiety as excitement made all of the difference in the world. And that's actually because anxiety and excitement both trigger the exact same physical response. It actually produces adrenaline. And so the only thing that changes the experience is what you believe about what's happening with your body. Some of you are like, I didn't come here to learn about a science experiment. How does this have anything to do with faith? How does this have anything to do with God? Well, I'm here to tell you that your brain doesn't actually know the difference between being nervous and being excited. The difference is how you label it in your brain. I actually think that doubt and faith work the exact same way. We're talking about doubt tonight. What if the doubt that you feel isn't actually a lack of faith, but it's an invitation to deepen your faith? You guys with me tonight? You guys good? I know we're jumping right into it. But what if God is using your questions not to distance you, but to actually draw you closer to Him? Tonight we're continuing the series. It's called Messy Faith, and really it's just talking about how can I practically live out my faith when it's a little bit messy? How can I live out my faith when I have these doubts? How can I live out my faith when I have these questions? Am I imperfect? Am I a bad Christian? I want us to understand that God has answers to these questions. But tonight, again, we're talking about doubt. And so the title of the message tonight, I want you to write it down, is this: doubt it, but do it anyways. Doubt it, but do it anyways. We're going to look at this story in the Bible that honestly, it's kind of tucked away. It's kind of like this hidden gem. I've honestly never really understood a lot of what this story was about until recently. But I think it shows us this perfect illustration of how doubt and faith can actually coexist and how they can actually work together. And so we're going to be in Mark chapter 9. And in Mark chapter 9, we see that Jesus, I want to give you some context. Jesus just comes down from this very, very spiritual moment in his life. It's something called the Transfiguration. You guys ever heard of that before? It's like a very biblical term, right? You can read that for yourself. Maybe it's a little bit confusing for you, but basically, it was this crazy experience where Jesus himself, he goes on top of this mountain. He brings Peter, James, and John with him. And we see that Jesus's full divine nature was revealed to Peter, James, and John. And not only that, we see two Old Testament characters show up in this moment, with that being Moses and Elijah. And so God is also literally speaking to Jesus. God is literally speaking to Peter, James, and John. And so I want you to imagine this moment in Jesus' life. Jesus goes up to the mountain. He sees the full glory of God. He himself reveals the full glory to the disciples that are with him. And then he heads back down the mountain afterwards. And we see that they're coming off of this spiritual high. But after they come off this spiritual high, they go back down the mountain. And then they just run into pure chaos. People are down the mountain. They're arguing. Jesus has been gone for a day. And they're trying to figure out what's going on. They walk into this crowd of people that is just going a little bit crazy. There's tons of drama. There's tons of confusion. People are arguing. They're fighting. Also in this moment, we see that there's this desperate dad, and his son is extremely ill. And we see that this group of disciples, the other 9 disciples, they were completely in over their heads. And so after this spiritual high moment where Jesus reveals himself, he goes back down the mountain. After that moment, we see they go down into the valley and they experience the complete opposite. This actually paints a beautiful picture of the contrast between a mountaintop moment and a valley moment. On the mountain, we see that God the Father says, "This is my son," talking about Jesus. But down in the valley, just a day later, we see that there's a desperate father, and he says, "Please help my sick son." You see, on the mountaintop, we see that heaven literally touched earth in this moment. But then just a day later in the valley, we see that all hell is breaking loose. Why do I tell you this? Why does this matter? Because I want to remind you tonight that we see that Jesus steps into both moments. He doesn't just show up for the holy moments. He's also not afraid of the messy moments. Jesus steps into both moments. You guys with me? You guys follow me? He's not afraid of the messy moments. And so what we're going to do is we're going to park on the second half of Mark chapter 9 after Jesus went up to the mountaintop. This is him coming down the mountain, and we're going to unpack this story in Mark chapter 9. But tonight we're going to look at 3 things that I want you to remember when it comes to wrestling with doubt. The first one is this: doubt is not the opposite of faith, it's the doorway to it. Doubt is not the opposite of faith, it's actually the doorway to your faith. So picking up in this story, Mark chapter 9, we're going to start in verse 14. Again, Jesus just came down the mountain. He's in the valley. All chaos is breaking loose. This is what it says in verse 14. It says, "When they came to the other disciples, the other 9, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law were arguing with them." And then verse 15 says, "As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder, and they ran to greet him." And then Jesus, he asked this question. He asked them, "What are you arguing with them about?" What are you arguing with them about? So again, Jesus walks into this messy situation, and the other 9 disciples, they're in over their heads. They're like, Jesus left. He gave us some instructions to keep the peace, but we didn't do that. And so they're just in a chaotic moment. This would kind of be the modern day equivalent of having an encounter with God on Tuesday and then having to go home and clean your room and do chores. Or you have this experience at summer camp and then you go home and maybe your parents are arguing and it's just full of chaos. That's exactly where Jesus was at in this moment. Moving on to verse 17 in the story, it says, "A man in the crowd answered, he said, 'Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground.'" We see here that this young boy, he's possessed by a demon. It says, "He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." They couldn't do it. So this desperate father, he comes to find Jesus. He understands that Jesus is nowhere to be found. He's up on the mountain, and so he's like, "I need someone to heal my son. Maybe I'll go to the disciples." The disciples in this story, we see they couldn't heal the man's son. They failed miserably. And I think there's some people in the room tonight who have gone to people for help and they failed you miserably. Maybe you've gone to your family for help and they've let you down. Maybe you've gone to your friends for help and they've let you down. Maybe you've gone to that leader or that pastor or that whoever and they've let you down. Can I just tell you that although other people might let you down, Jesus will never let you down. He will never let you down. And so, because nothing has changed in your life like you hoped it would, maybe you have some trust issues. You have some doubts. You've had some bad experiences with imperfect people, and so you now think that nothing will ever change in your life. Maybe some of you tonight doubt that God could ever use someone like you. Maybe you doubt that anyone will ever be consistent in your life again. Or maybe you even doubt that God is real because you haven't seen anyone else prove to you otherwise. And again, I just need to remind you tonight that although people will fail you, Jesus will never fail you. But what I love about this moment with this father is, although the disciples failed him and he was looking for Jesus, Jesus was nowhere to be found. Although that happened, we see that this father stays consistent and he waits for the source. In fact, the father stayed consistent even in the middle of his doubt. In the middle of his doubt. The father didn't let imperfections of the disciples ruin the miracle he was so desperately looking for. But he stayed just long enough until Jesus himself showed up. And I think that there needs to be some more doubting people in 2025 who are willing to wait just long enough for Jesus to show up. So in this next verse, I'm going to read it to you in a moment, but we actually see this kind of shift in this moment. And I don't know who you think Jesus is, but I actually see that Jesus was actually kind of like a savage in the Bible. Like, he says things, and I know he might have rubbed people the wrong way, but it was all out of love. Like, Jesus just says some crazy stuff in the Bible. And so in this next verse, we see Jesus gets a little bit frustrated. Does anyone ever get frustrated with people? Man, if your hand's not raised, I know you're lying. We all get frustrated with people. If Jesus got frustrated with people, we get frustrated with people, right? And so this is what it says in Mark 9:19, moving along in this story. It says, Jesus said to them, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you?" And then he just says this in this last part. He says, "I want you to bring the boy to me." Bring the boy to me. So we see Jesus is frustrated. He's not frustrated at the dad. He's not frustrated at the boy. He's frustrated at this moment. He's frustrated at the crowd. He's frustrated at the culture. And maybe he's just a little bit frustrated with the other 9 disciples. Why would Jesus be frustrated in this moment? Well, I think Jesus was frustrated because he was seeing these people trying to operate in a spiritual power without prayer and without belief. But although Jesus sees that, what I love is that Jesus doesn't walk away from this moment. Instead, he says, "I want you to bring this boy in my presence." What I love about Jesus is he doesn't cancel people, but he actually draws people near to him. He doesn't ignore the Father. He doesn't ignore the Son. Instead, he invites them in closer. You see, that right there is a beautiful picture of what Jesus does with messy people. What Jesus does with people who doubt. This is what Jesus does with people who are a little bit insecure. This is what Jesus does with every single person on this planet. He's never going to force you into it. He's going to say, "I love you enough to make the choice. Do you want to draw near to me?" And continuing on in verse 20, it says, so they brought him. They obey what Jesus asked them to do. And then when the Spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. This little boy looked like a fish out of the water, just flopping around, just going crazy, right? And so Jesus, he looks at the father. He asks the boy's father, he says, "How long has he been like this?" The father said, "From childhood. It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." Take pity on us and help us. We see that this demon in the presence of Jesus knows exactly who Jesus is. Boy, he falls down on the ground in front of everybody. He's foaming at the mouth like he's got rabies or something. This kind of looks like the scene out of like The Conjuring. You guys ever seen that movie before? I've actually seen the movie before. I don't condone that movie. That was back in my BC days before Christ. But that's kind of what this moment looked like. Like, this dude is just flopping around on the ground. But in all seriousness, I want you to capture this moment for the next few minutes. Instead of rushing this miracle, instead of immediately performing this task like everyone wanted him to do, Jesus slows this moment down and he asks the question, how long has this been going on? How long has this been going on? You see, in this moment, we see that Jesus isn't just trying to solve a problem, he's entering into the pain. He's entering into the pain. And that's actually what Jesus wants to do in the middle of your messy faith right now. Some of you are calling on Jesus saying, Jesus, why aren't you answering my problem? God, why aren't you solving these issues? And Jesus is saying, we're going to get to that, but I want to know the real you. I want to know your story. How long has this been going on? You see, sometimes we want Jesus to be this magical genie where we rub the lamp and he grants our 3 wishes, but I actually think that Jesus wants to be so much more in your life. You see, Jesus' purpose is not just to fix something, but he wants to know your story. Know your story. You know, sometimes we get frustrated at Jesus because we want him to be in a hurry. We want Jesus to be this immediate fix in our life. But we often see that in the New Testament, Jesus likes to slow things down. And it's not just to make us wait, but it's actually to help us feel seen. Some of you tonight, maybe you feel unseen. Can I just tell you that Jesus wants to see you where you're at? He's wanting you to slow down long enough to remember that he sees you, he loves you, and he wants to know your story. So we've seen that obviously doubt and faith, they can coexist. I think they always coexist. And it doesn't disqualify your faith, but it actually deepens your faith. But what if the very thing you're wrestling with right now is what God wants to use to actually build something stronger in your life? Which leads us to the second thing to remember when it comes to doubt, is that doubt can drive you deeper in your faith if you let it. Doubt can drive you deeper in your faith if you let it. You guys still with me? Yeah. I want to move on in this story. I've got a few minutes left, but Mark 9:22, it says, so this guy says, take pity on us and help us. If you can do anything at all, they're talking to Jesus. And then get this question that Jesus asks him. He says, if you can. It's almost like the Father is doubting Jesus' ability. If you can, said Jesus. He says, everything is possible for one who believes. Everything is possible for one who believes. And immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I want you to get this. This is the entire thesis of this sermon tonight. This statement right here. He says, I do believe, but at the same time, help me overcome my unbelief. I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. How does this happen? How is this possible? We see in this same moment that this father is sure, but he's also unsure. This father has some faith, but he also has some doubt. We see that 2 things are true at the same time, which means that you can have faith and you can have doubt in the exact same sentence. And if you don't believe me, just take one of Jesus' closest disciples, for example. One of Jesus' closest disciples was known as Doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas. He actually said that Jesus, whenever Jesus died, resurrected, came back to life, he appeared to so many people whenever he came back, whenever he was resurrected, and Thomas didn't believe him. He was saying, Jesus, if this is really you, I need to feel your scars and I need to see them for myself. And even when Thomas was so doubtful, we see that Jesus didn't push him away. Jesus didn't rebuke him. He didn't roll his eyes. Instead, he showed up and he said, I want you to come see the scars for yourself. Come and see for yourself. I want to remind you tonight that Jesus does not run from your doubt, but he walks straight into it. This tells us that doubt is not the killer of faith. Doubt can actually be the ignition of your faith. It's not the killer of it. It can actually be the ignition to it. And you know, I was kind of wrestling with this thought recently and really just asking God, what is happening in our culture today that a lot of these students could probably resonate with? Did you know there's this rise of this belief? It's called emotionalism. I don't know if you guys have heard this before. But basically what this means is in our culture today, there are so many people who believe that if I feel something, that means it's true. It's emotionalism. What I feel is true. The thoughts that come through my head, that's true. I must act on it, right? We think that just because we feel something means it's true, but that's exactly the opposite of what this story is telling us. You see, the Father understands that just because he feels a moment of doubt does not mean that Jesus cannot perform a miracle in his son's life. You guys with me? You tracking me? In fact, in Matthew 17:20, we see that Jesus is talking to this group of very doubtful disciples. And I want you to look at what he says in Matthew 17:20. He says, he told them, because you have so little faith, I can guarantee you this truth. If your faith is the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. If you have so little faith. What I think Jesus is telling his disciples here is you can actually have 99.999% doubt and 0.01% faith, and God can work with that. Just because you feel doubtful does not mean that's actually true. Just because you doubt that God will show up does not mean that God's not showing up in your life. Just because you doubt that God can do something with your life does not mean that God doesn't have a plan and a future and a purpose for your life. Just because your family seems broken and like there's no hope does not mean that God cannot restore those broken things in your life. Just because you feel it does not mean that it's true. Just because you feel it doesn't mean it's true. Do you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of what it looks like to have messy faith. And some of you have showed up with some doubts this week, and maybe you think that actually makes you feel weak. But I actually think that doubt doesn't make you weak. It actually makes your faith stronger, and it makes you real. It means you're human. And I think that when students stop asking questions, that's actually not spiritual maturity, it's spiritual passivity. Because doubt that is wrestled with, I think, leads to stronger roots. But doubt that is ignored is what leads to weaker ones. You want some deep, strong roots? Ask some questions. Bring those doubts to God. Don't ignore them. Don't suppress them. Don't overlook them. Instead, take those things that you feel and bring it to the presence of God. I want to go back to the story in Mark chapter 9. We see that this is a real moment in this father's life. And I think that this is a moment that many of you might find yourself in right now. Because again, he says, Jesus, I do believe, but I need you to help me with my unbelief. And I want to remind you that just like the disciples doubted, just like the Israelites in the Old Testament doubted when God came through time after time after time again, just like every Christian in human history has doubted, I need to remind you that all you need to do is wait long enough for Jesus to show up in the middle of that doubt. Because God does not need a perfect faith, just an honest faith. Not a perfect faith, just an honest faith. The last thing I want you to remember tonight, when you're wrestling with your doubt, is that your faith can be messy and it can still move mountains. Your faith can be messy and it can still move mountains. A couple verses at the end of this story in verse 25. It says, when Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, he said, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. In fact, the boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, he's dead. But get this, in verse 27, it says, but Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up to his feet, and he stood up. In this moment, we see that this healing is a little bit intense. This healing is a little bit messy. It's a little bit violent. In fact, this little boy, he falls so hard to the ground that everyone around him thinks that he died. He's dead. Look, again, I need to remind you tonight that when you stay long enough for Jesus to show up, the things that look dead actually get resurrected back to life. Just because it looks dead doesn't mean that Jesus is done. Some of you are in a place right now where you need the resurrection power of Jesus. Some things are dead in your life. Some things in your past, some things that you thought were over, and you need Jesus to step into your life and raise it from the dead. And I actually think that the devil is so good at whispering lies in your ear, and he's making you believe something that's not even true. You think things like, I doubt Jesus will actually show up for me. I've tried the Jesus thing, it doesn't work. I doubt Jesus will actually show up and heal my family. I doubt Jesus actually has something good for my life based off of the mistakes that I've made. And just like the boy in this story, you feel like you have spiritually collapsed, and you feel like your spirit is dead and there is no hope. The doubt is too heavy. The insecurities are too heavy. The struggle is too heavy. But can I just remind you right now that sometimes faith will feel like a collapse before it looks like healing. Before it looks like healing. There's this story, a real story that happened a long time ago in 1992. There's a runner by the name of Derek Redmond, and he was running in this Olympic race in 1992. We see that in this moment, he was about to run the 400 meter semifinal race, and the crowd is packed out. I mean, there's 65,000 fans in the stands. Everyone's cheering him on. The runners are taking their positions, and he's ready to go. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest moments, if not the biggest moment of his life. All eyes are on Derek in this moment. His family's in the stands. They're ready to watch him do some incredible things. But then we see that the gun goes off, the race starts, and Derek takes off in a full-on sprint. I mean, you could tell this dude's about to win it all. But then, about 150 meters in, less than halfway through this race, we see that something crazy happens. Because Derek starts screaming, he starts yelling, he starts holding his hamstring, and he falls to the ground. His hamstring actually snapped halfway through the race. It popped. It was a crazy thing that happened. And everyone in this moment, they gasped. And they were like, what in the world is going on? Why is this runner on the ground? The entire stadium was silent. But after just a few moments of being on the ground, we see something crazy happen. Derek begins to stand up, and he begins to hobble, and he begins to limp his way to the finish line in full pain. But that's not even the craziest part about this story. Because out of nowhere, we see that everyone turns to look at what's happening in the stands. We see that this gentleman, this man, is running through the stands down to the race, pushing through security to get to Derek. So he makes his way to Derek. He puts his arm around him, and he starts helping Derek hobble to the finish line. But just so you know, this wasn't some ordinary man. This was actually Derek's father. And he went up to his son. He wraps his arm around his son. He's saying, Derek, you don't have to do this. But if you do want to finish this race, I'm going to help you finish this race. And in this moment, we see that Derek and his father make it to the finish line, and the crowd starts cheering, and they start yelling, because this is a beautiful moment in history. And I actually think this is a beautiful picture of our Heavenly Father putting his arm around us, helping us finish the race. When it's messy, when we fall into the ground and we're feeling like, man, there is no hope for me. Our Father in heaven, who sent his Son because he loves us so much, is wrapping his arms around us. And he's saying, if you want to finish the race, I'm going to help you finish the race. I want to help you finish the race. So as we close tonight, going back to the story, we see that Jesus goes on to heal this little boy. It wasn't because the father had this flawless and perfect belief. It was because he had an honest belief. It wasn't polished. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't perfect. But it was surrendered. And I think some of us have believed this lie, that we think God only moves in our life when our life is perfect. When we're on a spiritual high. When we've read our Bible enough. When we've checked off all the boxes. But can I just tell you, that's the lie from the enemy. This passage proves the exact opposite. Jesus moved in response to a man who literally admitted to him that he had a hard time believing what was true. Can I just tell you, that's grace. That's Jesus. And I want to remind you of this picture that a professional rock climber doesn't climb because they're fearless. They climb because they trust their rope. Which means that you can move forward and still be afraid. You can move forward and still be unsure. You can move forward and still have some doubts. Faith doesn't mean you never doubt. It just means you've anchored yourself in someone stronger than your fear. And it's Jesus. It's Jesus. Man, I actually think that your mess doesn't scare Jesus. But your mess is actually where Jesus does his best work. And I want to close with this verse tonight. 2 verses, 28 and 29. It says, after Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? Why couldn't we perform this miracle? Why couldn't we do the thing that everyone was asking us to do? I want you to really read verse 29. He replied, this kind can only come out by prayer. This kind can come out only by prayer. You see, a lot of us in this room, you're trying to do something that you weren't meant to do. You're trying to perform a miracle that Jesus was meant to perform. And you're trying to do something in your own power, and Jesus is stepping into your world, and he's reminding you, you can't do that in your own power. You need me to show up in your life. The reason why that thing didn't work out is because you never invited me in. The reason why you're still stuck in doubt and insecurity and struggle is because you never invited me into your life. Some things only change when you stay connected to Jesus. So the question tonight isn't, will I ever stop doubting? The question is, what will I do with my doubt? And all of us in this room, man, we have an opportunity tonight to identify the doubt in our life. Maybe you feel like God can't use you. You're too broken. You're too young. You've got too much sin. You've got too much in your life for God to use you. Every single person in this room has a doubt, a deep-rooted doubt that God is saying, I want you to stay connected to me and I want you to bring it to me tonight. So with every head bowed, every eye closed, I want to give you an opportunity tonight. If there's anybody in this room, nobody looking around, no distractions, we've got a few more minutes. If that's you tonight and you say, Jonas, maybe I can't even put words to it, but I know there's a deep-rooted doubt in my life. If that's you tonight, would you just slip your hand up for me? Is there anybody tonight? Come on, lift them up bold. You say, Jonas, I'm kind of doubting this thing. Come on, keep them up. I've seen Jesus move in other people's life, but he's never moved in my life. I doubt that he's even real. If that's you, would you just slip your hand up? Come on, nobody looking around. That's awesome. Hands up all across the room tonight. You can go ahead and put them back down. What we're going to do is, and we're about to go into a moment of worship. And I just want to remind you tonight that some things will only happen in your life when you invite Jesus in. And we want to give you an opportunity to do that tonight. And so if we could you all just go ahead and stand up to your feet? Man, I love these moments. I love the theme of camp this year. The theme of camp is more than a moment. And I actually think that this right here is more than a moment. This moment right here could set up your entire future, could set up your eternity. And Jesus wants to step into your life tonight. Guys, I know what it's like to sit in a service and see God do things in other people's life and not feel him active in my life. And I've seen some of you walk into this room every single week, maybe sitting in the back, maybe sitting here with your arms crossed, maybe thinking that God can show up for other people, but God can't show up for you. Can I just tell you that's a lie? God will show up for you. My question is, will you meet him in the middle? Will you actually open up your mouth? Will you actually lift your hands? Will you actually surrender your life to Jesus? Or are you going to keep going through the motions? This is more than a moment. Here's what I want to do. We're going to go into the song of worship. And tonight, if you lifted your hand and you would say, Jonas, I'm doubting tonight. I have a struggle. Maybe it's not doubt. Maybe it's something else that you need to bring to God. If that's you tonight, I want to encourage you to just slip out of your seat and make your way down to the front. Is there anybody that would be bold enough to say, Jonas, that's me. I need to surrender this to Jesus. I want to remind you, being nervous and anxious is the same thing as being excited. You're not nervous, you're excited to step out. Let's clap for the people making their way down tonight. That's awesome. Is there anybody else that wants to join them up at the front tonight? Come on, this isn't to embarrass you. This isn't to make fun of you. This isn't to mock you. This is for you to show other people, to show the world that you are serious about what God has for your life. Is there anybody else? Anybody else? Come on, you can start making your way down. Yeah, we can keep clapping for them. Incredible. I want us to all just close our eyes in this moment, bow our heads. I want to pray over your life tonight. And over these next few moments, in this moment of worship, if that's you, and man, you really still need to step out of your seat and make your way down to the front and surrender it to God, I want to encourage you to do that tonight. And leaders, if you could, just help fill in up on the front and just start praying over these students, man. Let's pray tonight. Let's surrender our doubt to God. Let's not let this moment pass us by, because this is more than a moment. It's more than a moment. Jesus, thank you for every student, God, who's been obedient to your call. God, maybe they haven't stepped out of their seat, but maybe there's something that they're wrestling with right now that they need to give over to you. Maybe it's a doubt, maybe it's an insecurity, maybe it's a sin that they can't seem to let go of and they keep turning back to it. God, I pray that whoever that's for tonight, God, that they would leave a different person. God, that they would not leave the same person they walked into tonight. And God, we wouldn't wait for next week. We wouldn't wait for next month. We wouldn't wait for next year. But God, we would take a moment right now to surrender it to you. And so God, tonight as we worship you, as we sing this song, God, I pray that heaven would meet earth in this moment. And Jesus, you would show up in a new and unique way. God, I pray for every student that's represented in this place. God, that you would meet us, that you would show us you love us, that you would wrap your arms around us. God, that you would just remind us that you are with us even in the middle of our mess. We love you. We're so thankful for you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. Let's keep worshiping tonight.